often there are subjects that I want to know more about myself. They get touched on in different ways, different people trying to make different points, and sometimes I just like to try to dig in and try to find out everything I can about them. And this is one of those. We just went through Easter. Um, One of the points that people try to make as a something to be concerned about is the attitude toward Jews and Jesus, the Jew, had things to say about the Jews. So how is that, and what does that mean to us today? Well, to sort of give some context, first of all, let's talk about contemporary, what we call Jews today. Um, I think most confusing to us is that we have a modern state called Israel. And those people it's a nation made up of Muslims and Arabs and Orthodox Jews and atheists and Christians and people from all kind of ethnic groups, people from Europe, um, etc. A lot of the Jews in Israel are from Russia. So it's a political entity, and it's not a monolithic theocracy, which is what was the Israelites were called for back whenever they asked God to provide them a king, and the first king was Saul, and the king that everyone loves, and the king that was supposed to be the king is David. And you can go back and read the Old Testament about all of that, and Chronicles and Kings, etc., those kind of books. Now let's take a moment to discover what it means when we're referring to biblical Jews, because today a Jew may be somebody who's their mother was a Jew, and so they're Jewish. They may be an atheist, right? And so, what does it mean though to be a biblical Jew, or what happened up until Jesus? So, first of all, one thing we have to keep in mind is that Judah, who is the progenitor of all the people who claim to be Jews today, that's whether it's true or not, that's what they claim. Um, and of course, you can, even under when you look at the line of the bloodlines for Jesus in Matthew and other books, Luke's, I think it is. One's coming from the mother, one's coming through from the father. The pure is the one that comes through the mother. When kings, etc., normally are concerned about who, because she's the one that is carrying anybody. You keep everybody away from her, and you only have somebody, the right person, uh, have intercourse with the mother to make your bloodline pure. So, but anyway, you have Israel. Israel is, as you probably know, Jacob. Jacob had a brother named Esau, and he stole Esau's birthright. And you get back into Genesis, and you can learn all about Jacob and his sort of shady kind of character in many respects. But he has 12 sons. And one of those, of course, is Joseph, who ends up, the story of Joseph's multiple colored coat, and he ends up being viceroy of Egypt, and his brothers go and see him, etc. And that's how the Israelites end up in Egypt. They are Israelites. They are the sons of Israel because, again, go and read Genesis, I think it's 32, and you will see how Jacob takes on the name Israel. So these are the sons of Israel. Now, they're called Reubenites and Danites and Gadites and Judites. Okay, Judites. There's different ways that these groups are called by different communities, different nations, different cultures. But anyway, you'll see them called Judites and Danites, etc. There's I'll intend to do another video on the lost tribes, which are the 10 lost tribes of northern Israel. Get into that another time. But so, and then you have not only you've got the Israelites, and then you have the Hebrews. Now, the Israelites are Hebrews, but a Hebrew may not be an Israelite, because an Israelite is part of the community that lived with the Israelites. So they might be slaves or servants, hired hands, whatever. They could be, they're soldiers, etc. So, and as we know in the New Testament, we have the book of Hebrews, written by many think it Paul wrote it, but regardless, it's written to this community of people who are following and worshiping. These Hebrews, they worship Yahweh too. Okay, they're not, they don't have multiple gods. So that's the difference. So sometimes you'll see the word Hebrew used, which would be a broader casting of things. So what was a Jew in the days of Jesus, which was about 2,000 years ago? Now, once again, we got to get there. So we know that Saul was first king, David was the second king, Solomon is the son of David. After Solomon dies, then the kingdom splits. It was the 12 tribes together, and it splits. And you have Benjamin and Judah, who worship in Jerusalem at the temple, and then you have the other 10 tribes who break away and are ruled by a series of other kings. And they're all the other tribes: the Reubenites, the Simeonites, the Gadites, the Gadites, the Asherites, etc. So what happens? Well, that was the monarchy breaks up in 930. In 721, King Sargon II, the Neo-Assyrian Empire, he comes in and he takes the 10 the 10 tribes into exile. He didn't kill them. He did not wipe them all out. So this is why I think it's interesting to maybe look into the lost tribes, because these people didn't disappear. Their bloodlines didn't end. So you have the majority of Israel is around the world somewhere, right? You might be an Israelite, okay? If you could figure out how to test the blood to find that out. Not that I think it's important to do that. So they get taken away. That's the Assyrian exile. And they are exiled. They get taken away. Well, what happens when that happens? Well, for one thing, not all of them got taken away. You take away the leadership, and you take away the people who are making success on the land, and maybe you take away somebody who happens to own something that you want to give to one of your soldiers or to some other sycophant who lives in the area, an Ammonite or a Philistine or whatever, right? Some Canaanite, okay? So there's people still there. And even when we get to Jesus, the Samaritans in Jesus' day have a Yahweh-like religion. They're just not following it exactly. Many of them do. Of course, many of them are worshiping all kind of gods, which happened with the Israelites themselves. They were always going off and worshiping other gods, and had to get brought back. And a righteous king would show up and bring them back to God, etc. And this happened both in the northern kingdom of Israel and in the kingdom of Judah in the south. Anyway, so these the 10 tribes are lost. They're taken away into exile. And then about a couple of hundred, a couple of hundred years later, right? So 120 years later, then the Assyrians are the one that took Israel into exile. The Babylonians, the world stage, it's like the United States and Russia and China, they're different countries. They're taking each other, and one's pushing another out of here. We're not having these kind of wars, but they were having actual physical wars and pushing people, taking over different areas at different times. So by this point, the Assyrians are out, the Babylonians are in, and they come in and they take some of the Judahites into exile to Babylon. They take them into captivity. This is Daniel, the book of Daniel. Daniel, that character, is one of the people who go into exile at that point. They take these high intellectual, priestly, governmental kind of people, kings, princes. They take them into exile. And then about 10 years later, they come in and they take a second group of them into exile. And this is Ezekiel. You'll find Ezekiel in the Bible. So they take King Jeroboam and 10,000 people. That's 10,000. Now, how many people do you think lived in the area? Again, I doubt they took everybody. So there's people still, Judites still living there, and there's other people, but there's a vacuum happening now. And you've got Ammonites, you got people from surrounding areas that used to be run by King David and Solomon. Now they're starting to come into the area, and they're probably kissing up to the Babylonians and getting, jobs and properties and things like that, and paying bribes and getting a grip on what's left, right? And then let's see, and about another 10 years goes on, and the Babylonians come back and they tear down the walls of Jerusalem, etc., and take some more people into captivity. So these people are all in captivity, and while they were taken, as I mentioned, the Ammonites. Well, one of the things that in Obadiah it talks about, and somewhere else, I think Ezekiel, it talks about the Edomites coming in and participating in the plundering of the city. And so they weren't good, faithful neighbors to their Israelite kin. I don't know if I didn't mention it, let me point this out. So Esau is the brother of Jacob way back in the beginning, Israel. Esau is Israel's brother. Esau marries a Canaanite. So that means the bloodline of the Edomites, and that's who the Edomites, Esau's descendants are the Edomites. The bloodline of the Edomites are mixed in with all the Canaanites, whereas the bloodlines of Israel are pure. They're supposed to be pure. If you're not pure, then you're stepping out of your bloodline, right? So that was important, and in the biblical narrative, of course, God is looking for that bloodline, or the people to represent Him. Okay. So the Judites, then they've been in captivity. There's all this mixture of people who have taken over the area of Jerusalem. Of course, Jerusalem has been torn down, so there might not have been any Edomites living in Jerusalem, or probably a few. But around Jerusalem, there were people different kind of culture, other Canaanite kind of people. And so about 500 years later or so, in 445 or so, the Persians have taken over again from the Babylonians who did the other. The Persians come back in, they've taken back over, and Artaxerxes I sends Nehemiah. You can read the book of Nehemiah about how he gets permission to come back and rebuild the walls and the temple, and Artaxerxes I gives him the funds, etc., to do that. And when he gets here, gets to Jerusalem, he's got all these Ammonites and Horonites and Arabs and various other people who are trying to get in his way and keep him from building things, and always giving him a hard time and everything. But he stays true to what his mission is, and he and the other Israelites, these are observers of the worship of Yahweh who want to come back and rebuild their temple, so that they can worship Yahweh in the way that the law of Moses has told them to do it. These are followers of the law of Moses. Okay, I'm sure there's people who are Judahite lineage who stayed in Babylon because they had found a good life there. They, if you look at the book of Esther, if that has any historical reality to it, then they came to some amount of power in that culture. And so, if you've had a good life, right, go back, and you really weren't a big worshiper of Yahweh, then, hang out and stay in Babylon. But the people who came back were the strict observers of the Mosaic law and Yahweh, and worshipers of Yahweh. So, that happens. They start rebuilding, and there's, again, go and look at it. I think it might be in Ezra, but you can read Nehemiah, etc. You read the Old Testament, find out about it. But you can see where there's these tensions that happen with the people who are not Israelite. All right, there's tensions that are happening with surrounding Canaanite cultures that keep coming into play, including the Edomites. So then what happens is once the Judahites get back and rebuild things, and Artaxerxes has allowed them to do that, then but about another 100 years later, the Persians are defeated by the Greeks, and then the Greek, after Alexander, the Greek Empire gets divided up. So you have the Ptolemies in Egypt, and they have the Seleucids up around Turkey, etc. And so under the Jerusalem falls in the territory of the Egyptian Ptolemies, these Greeks. And they have a pretty good life there. They practice their religion. They pretty much rule themselves they're semi-autonomous. It's a pretty good deal for about 100 years or so. And then what happens? The Seleucid Greeks from up north come in and knock out the Egyptian Greeks, the Ptolemies, and they start oppressing the Judeans. And so this causes the first Jewish revolt, what's called the first Jewish revolt. And that happened about 167 BC, before Christ. 167, 160. This was led by a priest called Mattathias. So we may assume at this point that this guy is a Levite because he's a priest. And his family takes control. Now he's a priest, therefore his bloodline has priests to come. So he would probably be a Levite technically, but his family has this priestly background bloodline. At least it claims to have it, right? And they lead the revolt, and then his family become the rulers of Judea, and they are called what we know as the Maccabeans and the Hasmonean dynasty. Okay, so these are people who they seem to be trying to keep the bloodline clean and pure. Okay, so that works for a while. The Jews now, they have their own country, basically. They're not under anybody's, they rebel against the Seleucids, they get some autonomy again, and these Jewish leaders lead for 100 years or more. And then it gets to a point where they have an argument between who should be the ruler, and Rome comes in and takes over about what's this? Somewhere in there, Rome comes in and takes over. About 63 BC. Now, so Rome starts taxing them and oppressing them, and they get rid of they make this guy named Antipater the First, who is the father of the Herods. Okay, he takes over. He is an Edomite, and so what what do you do when you take over? Look at what's happened with. We watched Britain, the British Empire, taking over the world, and we know that it likely goes into the Middle East. Well, that's how Saudi Arabia was created. That's how Jordan was created. It's how some of these other Middle Eastern countries are created. Is that the British came in, they conquered the area, and they appoint somebody who they can trust to be the king of that area, and that's the way it works. Now, maybe it may or may not be the most legitimate king, but it may not be even close to being legitimate. It just may be somebody that works for them, and they make them the king. So the Romans are doing the same kind of thing, and so they take this guy who is Idumean in Greek, Idumean, is the Greek word for Edomite. Okay, now these Edomites, now you can imagine, they have been living around the Israelites for 1,000 years by now, right? And who's been in control of Jerusalem? It's been the Israelites for the most part. And so how do you, there's ample places you can read about different Edomites who were worked with and or against different Israelite kings, etc. So, sometimes they were on your side, sometimes there were some that aren't. And in other words, it's like anything else. People strive to gain control and power for themselves. So, and we can look at England over the last several hundred years, and there's people who were certainly not kings, queens, brothers of the kings, nephews of the kings, cousins of the kings. It didn't, to be a lord or something, you just had to make the king happy. And he appoints you, he makes you a lord or a knight or whatever that you get to be, right? So that's the way you gain power and prestige in the culture. And I'm sure there was something similar to that going on as it does. It's worldly. That's the way the world works. So these Edomites take over. But they had taken on the facade of being Jewish. Now, whether or not they really, look, when you don't care about who God is, well, one God's as good as another God, right? We see this all the time. So as long as you can do whatever you want to do, whenever you're the God of your own life, you can claim to believe this God or that God, but you're really the only God that you have, right? And so I'm sure that's the kind of people we're running into here. So anyway, I think that we probably have Edomites who infiltrated Judahite society, who pretended to be Jewish. Now, the Herodian rulers, as you went down, as they got married, of course, they did, as kings always are doing. Let's see, if we want to get some legitimacy for our reign, then what we're going to do is we're going to marry a true Judahite, somebody who's of the Hasmonean bloodline. So there was a lot of that kind of stuff that went on in subsequent years, where Judahites married into the Hasmonean Judahites would marry into the Edomite reign, the Herodian reign. Herod, and there's a whole long story how Herod becomes proclaimed the king of the Jews before Jesus was proclaimed by Pontius Pilate king of the Jews. So, and that's, let's see, you can look at places like 2 Samuel talks about David and the Edomites, who he defeated and subjected. And of course, Paul also had wars Saul had wars with the Edomites. So there was this tension that was going on. But the key to the Edomites is they needed to be certifiable with the people. And the way to be certifiable with the people appears to be become a Jew. All right. So there we are. We're down now to the time of Jesus. So why is Jesus making attacks on the Jews? And why do the writers of the Gospels and other places, say stuff about the Jews? Well, I can give you what I think I understand. So First of all, the priests were no longer Levites. The high priest was being appointed by the Romans or by the Herodian king. And if the high priest was being appointed, or likely others were, I don't know how the priesthood was working all in all, but people weren't born into the priesthood anymore. Now we know that going on back, if you go back, you find situations where some of the uh, people born into the priesthood who were priests were just pretty perverse, worthless people, evil people, and so you can have a priesthood with evil people in it just because you're born into it. But in this case, they didn't have the legitimacy of being born, so they weren't true Levites, or maybe they were Jews but not Levites. Maybe they had pure Judean bloodline, but it looks like, in all likelihood, they didn't. There was a lot of mixture going on there. So, linguistically, for example, Caiaphas, who is the high priest at the time of Jesus, appears. There's some people who make the argument that Caiaphas is Edomite, linguistically comes from Edomite kind of a location. Same thing with Judas Iscariot. Iscariot is linguistically comes from an Edomite location. So, but I don't know that clearly it appears that people weren't observing the racial purity laws, which, according to Mosaic law, they should be. Your king and your priest all should be, for sure. Anybody, any leadership really needs to be pure Israelite, pure Danite, pure. It wouldn't matter whether you were a pure Danite or a pure Gadite or Reubenite. Those tribes could intermarry between the different families, but you wouldn't be marrying a Canaanite, you wouldn't be marrying a Philistine, etc., or Egyptian or something like that. So they're not pure bloodlines. So we've talked about maybe they were power seekers, just like people who seek power today, who they come from nowhere, they come from nothing, and they find a way to make a name for themselves, make money, or have political victories, whatever it is that gives them prestige, and they're able to marry up in society. So maybe that was going on. But I think probably what is the real issue when Jesus calls them Jews is that they observe the Talmud and not the Mosaic law. This is where Jesus, if you read the Gospels, Jesus is railing against the Pharisees and Sadducees, etc. He's railing against them for following in the traditions of their elders. They're following tradition. What's the musical tradition? Well, that was a problem. It's a problem for all of us. All of us who follow traditions, we're off on the wrong foot. Okay, I think this is the key to it, to me, from as I read Scripture. So in Matthew 15 and Mark 7 and Matthew 23, you'll see him going after them about their traditions. So if you and the Talmud, even today, Jews, as I understand it, Jews focus their learning. I'm not saying that none of them ever read the Old Testament, but their learning, their perfection of knowledge is focused on the Talmud. And the Talmud is a commentary written by various rabbis in the past. And even today, I've watched videos of rabbis talking, and what is in the Talmud is not Christian related at all. In fact, there's rabbis who basically say everybody who's not a Jew is a slave to the Jew. That's the purpose. The Jews are going to rule the world. That's what they're waiting for the second coming. That's why Jesus didn't work for these guys. Jesus is not working for those Talmudic Jews because he didn't bring them power. He didn't make everybody else a slave. They continue to be slaves. So until they're not slaves anymore, they're not going to be happy, right? So anyway, out of their own mouth. I've not studied the Talmud. I have enough to do just to study the Bible, right? Get around to reading things and that. But that's what I understand. So, and as I pointed out, the Talmud is not the law of Moses. So Jesus, you pay attention. Jesus talks to them about Moses' law, and what they're doing is following these traditions. And of course, they're very proud of themselves, especially the Pharisees. They follow the traditions so exactly right? But they're missing everything, according to Jesus. So, these are the Jews. These are the people who, after Jesus is crucified, buried, and rose again, and ascended into heaven, these are the guys that the other people in the New Testament are writing about, who they continue to try to run the world from their particular worldview, their Talmudic worldview, their personal power worldview. Those are the Jews. Those Jews are giving Peter a problem. Now, of course, all of the apostles are all Jewish. They're all Judeans, except for possibly Judas Iscariot, who appears to be from the south end of Israel, down next to Edom. And but they're, so what are they doing? Pointing, that's the confusion of it all, is that they've got these Jews calling other people Jews. So why are they doing that? And I think this is why they do that. They're so when you say that person is a Jew today, you look at a Hollywood filmmaker, a comedian, a songwriter, whoever it might be, and you say they're a Jew. Well, you're not saying these people study and adhere to the Talmud. That's not what you're saying. You're saying these people see themselves as having the bloodline of the people of Judah. Now, we know that there's a circumstance where some people convert to Judaism for various reasons. Sammy Davis Jr. converted to Judaism. Well, he's not a blood Jew, but if his wife had a child with him, then that would be a blood Jew, right? I'm a blood English or something, right? You may hear about Khazarians, who this is a kingdom that was over there in between Russia and the Ottoman Empire, who decided, was encouraged to do something besides what they were doing, and they decided, well, we'll become Jewish. Now, I don't know whether they weren't practicing Judaism. They weren't claiming Judaism until a certain point in history, when finally they decided, well, we haven't been, we've been like a practicing mysticism of different types, but we're just going to become a Jew to make everybody around us happy, because the Muslims know what a Jew is and the Christians know what a Jew is, so we'll become a Jew. That's my interpretation of how it all worked out. And we don't have to be either Christian or Muslim. We'll just be a Jew. We don't even know what a Jew is. But I'm sure there were Jews that lived in the area. Jews have been taken into exile and all over the place. So, and then once you decide to be a Jew, all you have to do is start marrying into the bloodline of the Jew, and then you have your children become a bloodline Jew, and etc. But anyway, if you're a man. So they're not practicing the faith of their forefathers, because they're not, or they don't practice the faith of the King David. These Jews that Jesus are pointing at are practicing another tradition, okay, and they are worldly people who are clothed in religious garb, basically. So Jesus didn't condemn the Jewish race, but he attacked those who held themselves to be superior to others because of their adherence to the traditions. Now, what about the Israelites who got assimilated into other cultures? What happened to those people? Well, maybe I'll talk about them another time. But as always, I'm just trying to find out what the truth is. I do try to stick my nose in it, drill down into things, and understand it. And I thought maybe you'd enjoy getting sort of an overview of this stuff as well. Have a good day.